Emerging from the ruined tower, Moxis stretches his aching back.
Another handful of skeletons. At this rate it will take years to gather a useful number.
His ruminating is interrupted by a shrill voice.
Oi, Skelly man, give us your black dogs. What? Oh, it's just a damned goblin. Boss says want black dogs. Give me, or I'll shank ya. Sajita Flamma.
As the goblin is consumed in crackling flames, a squeal erupts from the bushes nearby.
Curses, am I bereft of all wit? Of course it wasn't alone. Come, minions, let us break them and gather their corpses.
Moxis seeks to drive the goblins from the field, though that's made harder by all of his units suffering a -1 to their activation stat. He's been ousted from his kingdom, so until he finds a new one, his units all come from occupied territory. The Goblin Patrol are on the hunt for wolves. If they can destroy Moxis' units, that's great, but unbeknownst to the Necromancer, their primary objective is to capture 10 wolves. A wolf that is defeated in melee combat becomes captured. A wolf that is shot or flees the field, however, does not. So the goblins will have to be careful how they go about it, lest they scare the wolves off before they can be nicked. Moxis the Reanimator takes the initiative on the first turn with a 10. Gesturing dramatically and chanting arcane words, he binds the magical weave and launches a fireball towards the goblin ranks. It explodes among the Wolf Rider scouts, throwing 2 smoking from their mounts. The rest quieting their steeds and remaining steady under the gaze of the goblin captain, Lurk. Goblin slaves are driven forward by the cracking whip of their slave master. The raven-hide wolves snap and growl amongst themselves, slowly slinking forward. In contrast, the Gloomfang wolves bound forward eagerly, joining the raven-hide, bolstering their number and, hopefully, emboldening them. Wugar the troll and the goblin soldiers rush forward in line with the slaves, keeping them on target and eager to capture some wolves. The Darkmaw prowl forward uneasily, the scent of the troll making them nervous. The Wolf Rider scouts ride forward along the flank, slowing as they make their way up the steep hillside. They are mirrored by the Shadow Pelt, who lope towards the hill to meet them. The second line of goblins moves forward, goblin archers behind the soldiers, and Captain Lurk, oh dear, that wasn't intentional but it's happening now, moves up behind the slaves with his spear goblins. The Scavengers, a group of ghouls, run up on hands and feet mimicking the wolves' loping gait, while the bones of the barrier hills, skeleton soldiers march slowly forward a few paces, remaining close to Moxis. Here's the table at the end of turn 1, both sides advancing towards the centre. Some of the wolves have been a little reluctant, but otherwise everything else activated without a problem.
Hunting like a wolf.
Initiative on turn 2 goes to the Undead again, though the goblins get a strange event on double 6s. Moxis' sweeping movements and loud incantations have disturbed a swarm of stinging insects, which rise from their hive in the grass and overrun the Necromancer. His attention distracted from the battle, Moxis becomes disordered. Classic Moxis. Cursing loudly, he raises his gnarled staff into the air and slams it forcefully into the ground. A blast of dark, swirling energy bursts from the impact, and the insects fall lifeless to the ground, a circular scar of dead grass marking the Necromancer's position. Breathing a satisfied sigh, Moxis steps up behind the bones of the barrier hills to spot targets between their skeletal bodies. The Goblin Slave Master continues to drive his minions forward, his biting whip cracking across the more reluctant slaves. The Ravenhide and Gloomfang bound forward, encouraged by their combined pack, and wheel towards the gap between the far hills. The Goblin soldiers react in turn. Nets and clubs ready, they wheel and advance towards the approaching wolves, preparing to recruit some, volunteers. The Darkmoor wolves remain uneasy, slinking forward behind the cover of the hill. Woogar the troll continues to lumber forward, brandishing his jawbone club. His less than gentle conscription methods will probably result in more broken wolves than would be ideal. The bones of the barrier hills wheel to protect their flank and line up with the troll, one of the more significant threats to Moxis' forces. The Wolf Rider scouts clamber up the treacherous slope, spotting the dark-robed necromancer in the distance. Their bowstrings sing as they release their arrows, which scatter across the grassland in front of Moxis, his magical shielding protecting him from the reaching shafts. The Shadowpelt wolves find themselves with the troll on their flank and unable to reach the Wolf Rider scouts, so they wheel backwards off the hill to face the more immediate threat. Captain Lurk and his spear goblins continue their march up behind the screening slaves, barking orders left and right and keeping his force in good order. Awaiting the right time to spring the trap, Moxis has the scavengers shuffle sideways and pivot, keeping them concealed from the approaching goblins. The goblin archers begin to bicker the moment Lurk is out of sight, some wanting to shoot wolves for sport, some wanting to leave the valuable animals to be captured. In the end, they manage to wheel towards the gap to support their main line. Turn 2 ends with a bit of manoeuvring, both sides jostling for position. The Wolf Rider scouts have line of sight on Moxis and so will be eager to send more shafts his way, while the goblins march into the jaws of the undead. There are a couple of chonky units there though, so I'm sure they can handle what Moxis has to throw at them, while on the flank the wolves are ready to overwhelm the lone goblin soldiers, which is exactly what the goblins want. Oh dear. Moxis takes the initiative again on turn 3 with a 9. The Darkmoor wolves are roused by the sight of the goblins before them, much less scary than the troll scent they caught, and wheeling slightly, they charge the goblin soldiers, coming up and over the hill and barreling into their flank. Jaws snap and tear, rending goblin flesh as they pull 3 of the goblins to the ground, ripping the life from them. Attention occupied by the wolves to their front, the goblins only manage to take down 1 wolf in return, clubbing and then netting the canine, where it is dragged to the rear to be taken back to the kennels. Despite the shock, the goblins maintain their courage. The wolves, however, become preoccupied with the prey they have dragged down, and pulling it back up the hill, begin to feast, uncaring of the action around them. The Wolf Rider scouts realise they have misjudged the range and urge their mounts forward along the crest of the hill. Bending their bows once more, they release another scattering of arrows towards the black-clad necromancer. Moxis' magical shield deflects some of the arrows, the remainder peppering the ground around him, and Moxis' confidence grows as he remains unharmed by a second volley. With the Wolf Rider scouts now in charge range, the Shadowpelt's courage deserts them. One whiff of the monstrous troll and they back up, whining, their tails held between their legs. Sensing their fear, the troll pivots towards them, before lumbering in their direction, club held high and ready to strike. Moxis' attention switches from the Wolf Rider scouts to the troll as it trudges through his field of view. He swiftly chants and grasps at the strands of the weave, but they slip through his fingers and his fireball spell dies in a puff of warm air. Frustrated, he shifts sideways to take cover behind the bones of the barrier hills. Captain Lurk bellows orders to his spear goblins and the slave master in front of him. Seemingly aware of the stalking ghouls lurking over the rise, the slaves wheel 90 degrees to the left, simultaneously getting out of the way and covering the spear goblin's flank. As they move from their path, Lurk leads his bodyguard forward behind them. Failing to deal with the troll on his own, Moxis sends the bones of the barrier hills forward. They wheel and charge into the troll's side, horribly exposing their rear in the process. They strike hard as the troll moves towards the wolves, bronze swords and axes cutting deep into its hide. Woogar roars in pain, sweeping his club out to his left, driving the skeletons aside and shattering 2 into pieces under the heavy blow. Ignoring the pain from his bleeding side, Wurgar smashes a further uncaring skeleton to dust as he moves away from the unappetizing corpses. The goblin archers finally spot a target. Moving forward, they send a ragged volley of arrows towards the flank of the bones of the barrier hills. The arrows rain down around the skeletons, smashing one to pieces as repeated blows sunder the binding energies holding it together. The Ravenhide and Gloomfang fall to infighting as they argue about which pack deserves the tastiest morsels. The wolves snap and growl at each other before the Alpha restores order, the two packs having shifted sideways slightly. As Moxis concentrates on the troll, his command of the scavengers wavers, and they mill about aimlessly for a moment before Moxis reasserts control. But the moment is lost, and he reorganises them for a charge next turn. So ends turn 3. A little damage to the troll, skeletons and goblin soldiers, but Moxis' units have failed to deliver, most of them failing their activations when he needed them to press the enemy. The goblins now find the units exactly where they want them.
Ha! I think you'll find my shields quite impenetrable.
Initiative on turn 4 goes to the Undead again. Moxis is just outside of range of the Goblin Spears, so he orders his skeletons to charge the troll once more. They surge back into the troll's side, weapons of bronze biting out, overwhelming the troll and fatally wounding the creature. Wurgar lashes out in his death throes, ruining 3 skeletons with wild blows of his club. As his many wounds take effect, he teeters, before collapsing forward, crushing 2 further skeletons beneath his bulk as his ruined body slams into the earth. The walls of the goblin scouts buck and growl, agitated by the smell of blood, but determined to take down their prey, the scouts steady themselves as best they can and loose arrows towards Moxis once more. Despite, or perhaps because of their unruly mounts, one of the arrows penetrates Moxis' arcane shield, burying itself in his shoulder. Moxis gasps in agony and falls to his knee, the pain and shock of being struck staggering him. With the Alpha Wolf back in control, the Ravenhide and Gloomfang rush the goblin soldiers. Jaws snapping and tearing, the goblins shelter behind their shields. One goblin goes down as a wolf grabs his ankle and drags him into the pack, but the shields foil the rest of the wolves. As they claw and gnaw at the wood and hide barriers to no effect, the goblins' clubs rain down upon them, stunning 2 of the wolves, who are then netted and pulled behind the goblin line. Surrounded by wolves, the goblins begin to panic, and frustrated by the goblins' shields, the wolves back up, their confidence shattered. The goblin archers draw their bows back, releasing arrows towards the final skeleton soldier. Their arrows cut through the air around their target, the skeleton remaining untouched. The Darkmoor wolves continue to harry the corpses at their feet, blind to what goes on around them as they feast. Captain Lurk continues dictating orders at the slave master, and the slaves shuffle sideways to maintain their guard of the spear goblin's flank. Intent on gathering more wolves, Captain Lurk wields his spear goblins and advances on the last of the bones of the barrier hills. Spears thrust forward as the goblins march, shattering the skeleton before it has a chance to strike back. Faced with this advancing wall of spears, the Shadowpelt continue to whine and whimper, shifting around and looking for an escape. The scavengers finish reorganising and pounce forward, withered arms and legs propelling them over the hill with ease. They smash into the goblin slaves, gruesome claws and rusty knives ripping their rag-robed victims apart. One ghoul falls as his reckless lunge sees him impaled on a shaking goblin's decaying dirk, but as they fall to the ground, his filthy teeth find the slave's throat, and he ends his unfortunate killer in turn. With his charges no more, the slave master slips away in the chaos. Moxis takes a moment to overcome the piercing agony in his shoulder and rises unsteadily back to his feet. Suddenly confronted with his own mortality, he backs away, heart thundering in his chest as he fights to regain his focus on the lines of power that span the world. That's the end of turn 4 with losses on both sides. The troll and slaves slain for the goblins, and their skeleton soldiers destroyed for the undead. The wolves are proving themselves fickle, and Moxis will need them to sort themselves out if he's got any hope of pulling out a victory.
Good doggies. Good doggies.
Initiative on turn 5, arguably the most important so far, goes to the goblins. Captain Lurk immediately urges his spears onwards.
Get them.
He wheels and charges his bodyguard into the Shadowpelt wolves.
Get black doggies.
Snare poles are passed forward to the front rank, and the goblins expertly loop and pin the wolves, entangling them before the wolves have a chance to bite back. Capturing 5 wolves in one go, Lurk cheers maniacally.
Yes, Lurk is best.
Moxis continues to back away, unable to summon the willpower to manipulate the weave.
No, what is happening?
His courage fails, and he fumbles through his pouches, searching for that potion of speed. The Wolf Rider scouts hone in on the faltering necromancer, fleeing targets their favourite victims, and urging their mounts forward, they loose another volley towards Moxis. As he begins to turn, the arrows smash through his mystic defences, and pierced by many arrows, the pallid necromancer falls. The scavengers, bloodlust clouding their senses, wheel hard to the right and hurtle towards the goblin archers, clawed limbs hastening their rush. The goblin archers hurriedly set Nock to string and release a point-blank volley of arrows as the ghouls hit their line. The entire front rank collapses under the withering hail of shafts. The remaining ghouls cut down 2 goblins with their rusted cleavers, but are driven back as the goblins draw daggers and butcher the uncaring monstrosities, until only one remains standing. However, the close call unnerves the archers. They're not supposed to be in hand-to-hand combat, and they begin to shuffle away from the fight. Still surrounded by wolves, the goblin soldiers continue to panic, their officer struggling to reorder them, and they wheel backwards, away from the Darkmoor wolves on their flank. The Darkmoor wolves finish their feast and regather to hunt more prey, shifting sideways up the slope of the hill. The Ravenhide and Gloomfang continue to whine and bicker, the Alpha struggling to keep the 2 packs in order. That's turn 5, and things have gone terribly for the undead. Moxis cut down by arrows, the Shadowhide wolves captured, and almost an entire unit of ghouls destroyed, for a couple of goblin archers in return. Given their track record, I doubt the wolves will be turning the tide.
Oh, Mr. Ghoulie, what big teeth you have. Don't talk to it.
Initiative on turn 6 goes back to the undead with a 10. The Darkmoor wolves leap down the hillside and barrel into the front of the disordered goblin soldiers, dragging one from his feet. The goblins manage to bundle up 2 of the wolves in return, but the snap of jaws and deep growls of the wolves becomes too much for the goblins, and they flee from the field with their prizes.
Run away!
All thought of the fight leaves the mind of the last few Darkmoor wolves as they gorge themselves on the newest meal available to them. Further unnerved by the fleeing soldiers behind them, the officer of the goblin archers nevertheless manages to keep his charges in position and avoids joining the rout. But that's all he can manage, unable to restore order within his ranks. With their eyes shifting around in alarm, the archers release a few shots towards the ghoul in front of them, but their panicked efforts are half-hearted at best, and none manage to strike their target. With a grotesque hiss, the last of the scavengers lunges for the archers, sinking his broken teeth into a goblin's neck and bowling him to the ground. This act of savagery is too much for the remaining goblins, and they join the soldiers and fly from the field.
Flee for your lives!
From there, we'll call the game. The remaining units are too far away to have much of an effect on each other, and the goblins have achieved their goal. They have crushed the undead forces and captured 10 of the wolves, securing themselves a major victory. Let's find out what happens to Moxis. That's not a good sign. Roll our dice. Moxis is finally dead. Not sure how I feel about that. Well, I guess that's that. It was always going to be a tough one for Moxis with the -1 to activation for everything for no longer having a kingdom, and the fact that he's a really expensive model in such a small points game, so we didn't have a lot of time to muck around. And muck around he did. I mean, 1 spell in 5 turns. Come on, mate. The goblins, however, did really well. So with our main protagonist / antagonist dead, what happens to the rest of the narrative campaign? Well, it scuppered my plans to the east, but we still have a lot of named characters in the Blasted Lands, so we'll focus on them. I had planned to switch back and forth, but never mind. I don't know what I'm going to do with all these boxes of cultists I brought now, though. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. And a huge, huge thank you to my supporters on Patreon. Your continued support is very much appreciated. Alright, we'll see you next time. Cheers.